Okay, so hello and welcome to the fourth day of TPAC's Web Performance Working Group's festivities. As always, this call is being recorded and will be posted online. And today on the agenda, we have a few things. First, I want to talk about unifying the various opt-ins, or at least rationalizing the various opt-ins that we have for timing allow origin, course, and corp. Then Ian will provide us with an update on the reporting API. And then I will talk about some ideas I have around reporting API and actually reporting performance metrics. But let me start by sharing my screen and talking about opt-ins. Also, we have on the call a few folks from WebPerfWG, so be nice to them. And
we also
do you want to maybe introduce yourselves while I'm figuring out the screen sharing bit?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mike West. I do some security stuff, mostly at Google, mostly on Chrome.
Hey, I'm Camille. I do some security stuff at Google with Mike.
Hello, I'm Arthur. I do the same thing as Mike and Camille, but focusing primarily on Google and less on Chrome. So I'm part of the security team, and we just try to make sure that our web applications are safe for our users.
Cool. What is the problem with opt-ins? Generally, we have a lot of them. They are not well layered. And as web developers, I think it's unclear which opt-ins should fit where. And for example, for public resources that where all the opt-ins should apply, today web developers need to set all of them. So the current state is that we have too many opt-ins and it's just somewhat of a mess. And when I'm talking about opt-ins, I'm talking about timing allow origin, cross-origin resource policy, so corp with its friends, CoAP, and generally we'll talk about cross-origin isolated contexts. And then we have the cross-origin resource sharing that we all know and love. There are various information types that we've talked about in the working group before. For timing related information, we have resource level timing. So for example, response start. We have origin level timing. So various things that are related to the connection and, for example, to worker start that essentially provide us with origin level information, but with timing allow origin, every resource is allowed to provide that. And then finally, we have user network level information, which includes DNS related information, as well as next hop protocol, which we have a bunch of issues that are discussing that. Then we have various entries in resource timing that expose the resource size. So we have transfer size, encoded body size, decoded body size, and resource size is somewhat of a it's somewhat sensitive information because it is used in many cross-origin leaks. And then finally, we have caching information that is also being exposed by transfer size because that size is 0 when the resource is cached. Looking forward, we have a bunch of feature requests that also involve a bunch of new information that people would like for us to expose. One is resource metadata, such as HTTP status code and content type information that is not currently exposed in resource timing. And then we have desire to have some opt-in for frames to report various timing entries to their parents. And that, so that's another type of information that you may eventually want to expose. A concrete proposal, since we've discussed all these in the past, and I'd like to maybe make progress on this. I believe that we should split up the current, so currently resource timing information is all being exposed behind the timing allow origin. I believe that this is not ideal. I think that timing related information should remain behind timing allow origin, but also be implicitly provided for CORS enabled resources. And then there are questions on whether we need some sort of a host level opt-in that for the information that goes beyond what the resources expose. But at the same time, that information is also exposed for CORS enabled resources. Then we have the sizes related information, the resource size related information, which I think we don't want to allow for TAO enabled resources, but do want to allow for corp enabled resources as well as CORS enabled resources. And my main reasoning here is that we're already exposing, or we agree to expose as part of the memory measurement API, the resource size information for cross-origin isolated contexts. So in that sense, resources that agree to be embedded through corp implicitly agree to have their sizes be exposed. And CORS, again, it gives you direct access to the bytes, so it's also fine to expose the size in that case. And maybe there is a room for a more granular sizes allow origin, but I don't currently believe that's the case. But if someone on the call disagrees, I'd love to hear that. And then for caching related information, I believe that's something that we can also say that we're willing to expose with corp, especially because partitioned caches are now a thing, and caching information becomes significantly less interesting than it used to be from a privacy leak perspective. And finally, not finally, but there's also the question of metadata, such as status code and content type. And I don't think we necessarily need to make decisions on that right now, because this is not something that we are currently shipping. I think it makes sense for corp to also be the opt-in for that case, but I could be wrong, or it could make sense for some metadata, but not other metadata. So maybe we can somehow split apart the different types of metadata into different categories. And then for parent frame reporting, it seems like something else entirely. And it's it seems like something that we would want to discuss separately from everything else. And now, finally, the next hop protocol question. And right now, we somewhat decided to put next hop protocol behind a tau opt-in, but that doesn't really make sense because to me, the information that next hop protocol exposes is information that's already observable, and B, makes no distinction. So the concern there is that it exposes things about the user's network. So for example, if the user has a proxy that downgrades HTTP 2 to HTTP 1, next hop protocol makes it observable. And my claim is that it's observable anyway and is not something that is specific to third-party resources or cross-origin resources versus same-origin resources.
Wait, so when you say it's observable anyway, why? How is it observable?
It's observable by triggering more than 6 requests and seeing how they react on the network when they're being sent and when responses are being received.
What do you mean by how? I don't really follow that. Like what?
Network. The network characteristics of different protocols, so HTTP 1 versus 1.1 versus 2 in particular, are extremely different from one another. And it's very easy to trigger multiple requests for an attacker that wants to acquire that information. It's very easy to trigger multiple requests, seeing how they behave in terms of timing, and then either through resource timing or even through requests that are CORS enabled, and we can see when the bytes start to trickle in. And through that, it's very easy to know if you're dealing with an H1 server or an H2 server. It may get trickier with other protocol versions. So H3 versus H2 may be a bit more complex. I haven't given it a ton of thought. But
I mean, so this seems like maybe it's a bit tangential point, but if that's actually true, and somehow we are exposing whether the user is behind a firewall, what kind of firewall it is, that sounds like a pretty bad fingerprinting surface. Yeah, that sounds pretty bad. But beyond that, I mean, it seems stretched to say, oh, like you can like observe the network characteristics, and based on that, like you can infer which protocols used. Sounds a bit of stretch to like say, because therefore it's okay to expose the protocol, because I mean, you may not know what kind of other resources you could load from that origin, right? Like you said, attacker could like request multiple resources and observe what they do, but like attacker first need to know whatever the server like it's loading from, you have other resources you can load from. Like,
yeah, but if the attacker in this case is trying to conclude things about the user's network, they can provide the resources. And use that to inspect without ever talking about resource timing, just through CORS, fetch, and but maybe we can maybe let's dive into that later. Maybe we can start from the top and see if the WebPerfWG folks like regarding timing, like the timing question and having CORS imply timing allow origin. What do y'all think about that? So basically this part.
Yo, can I have one clarification here as well? for all of these, you're saying that if cores is on the resource, it would also imply, like, so that applies for sizes and caching and metadata? Like, are you saying that
That
cores
is
would imply core, which would imply sizes?
that is what I'm proposing. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I just want to make sure I answered that. Thank you.
So basically, it means that cores become a mode where you say this origin can treat my resource exactly like if it were same origin. You get access to all of the stuff you would have by default if you were same origin with the resource.
In a way, I don't know if I would define it as it becomes same origin, but essentially what I'm like, my reasoning here is that this information, like cores already enable byte for byte exposure for all these things. So in a way, all this information can be polyfilled for cores enabled resources without resource timing ever being in the loop. And therefore, I think it's fine to expose it in those cases. But I may be wrong. And
no, I'm not saying that's the case. It's just, it's a way to conceptualize, and I think that can be an easy way for people to reason about it, basically.
okay. Maybe I haven't thought about it in that sense, but so it doesn't. The reason I'm afraid of calling it that is that the credential handling for cores is very different, and people may get confused by that. But
yeah, I'd say in terms of information about the resource, it behaves a bit like if you were same origin with the resource. In terms of information you have access to. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that I'm sorry, Ryusuke, I think you were going to talk.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm a bit skeptical of the assertion that because the cores allow resources to be read in the originating origin, like the one that initiated the load, then it and then from there to say that like all these things are observable, it's not really right. I mean, some of the things in it, resource timing and the size, it's not necessarily observable depending on resource type and how it's loaded.
So let's talk about timings first. But I'm curious about your, but from the things that are relevant for timing. So, response start and all those points in between that are related to the resource level loading. Do you see any problem there with exposing them to cores?
I mean, I think it's problematic to expose that in like just because the resource has a course, right? Like they never agree to expose that information by opting to course before.
Oh,
I mean it's one thing that's the core. Course is a brand new thing we're trying to add.
So
it's another to have a course suddenly start exposing extra information that they never agree to. So
I'm not talking about corp here. I'm talking about cores. So the Google.
Yeah, I understand. What I'm saying is, it's okay if the course is a brand new thing we're adding and saying, okay, like this new thing would also imply tau, but like a course is a thing that exists for decades and people have been using that for decades, and it's problematic to say like, oh, this thing we added before, by the way, would also mean this new thing, right? Like, I mean, imagine that like in a scenario where, like, let's say like you had some sort of event handler, in HTML, and then suddenly it said, oh, if you had an event handler, we also just immediately execute the script, as soon as you parsed. Like that would be pretty problematic, right? I mean,
so
that would be a bit of extreme case, and it will never do that. But I'm saying here, like in general in the security, it's bad idea to have existing feature do more stuff and make it less secure.
sure, but my claim is that it's not less secure because it's already exposing all those things as part of cores, because you can fetch the resource and observe when each different byte in the resource has hit the client. So the timing information doesn't provide more. Yes, Arthur.
So I just wanted to follow up on this point. I was wondering if you could talk about the delta between what Tao exposes right now and what is observable via cores, because it seems like this is the sticking point, right? Because I think hypothetically, if we could convince ourselves that everything that is gated behind Tao is already observable in qualitatively a similar way, if you set cores, then the legitimate argument that Ryosuke mentioned becomes less bad, let's say, at least in my view, right? Because we're not expanding what cores lets you do in a very meaningful way. So I'm wondering if we can go through maybe some of the specific properties that are gated behind Tao and talk about how they could be read if a resource sets cores.
Yeah. Okay. So looking at resource timing and the different points in time that it enables, we have redirect start, redirect end, connect. So domain lookup start and end, connect start, connect end, as well as secure connection start, which basically exposes whether it's a TLS or not. And then request start, response start. So essentially, without Tao and without Tao, all we have is the start time, fetch start, and response end. And timing allow origin gives us opt-in to everything in between. And at least, so if we're talking about what does cores enable us to observe, I believe that it will enable us to observe so response start for sure. But yeah,
I mean, to me, it is problematic to expose how long a TLS handshake took, or things like how long the DNS lookup took, right? I mean, those are like pretty sensitive information.
The redirect step as well, I would have a hard time understanding how cores would give you that.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there are two categories of data here. One category has to do with network conditions that are outside the control of the server, and the other has to do with the work that the server is doing to give you a response. And I think that cores will give you all of the stuff that the server is doing, especially like all the response work. So I start sending you bits, and then you can stream those bits so you have a good indication of when they're actually landing. It doesn't appear to me that cores would give you any of the worker or app cache stuff in the middle, although you would have that because you are in control of the worker, so you can like do the stamps. It certainly doesn't give you DNS. And in fact, it's weird that Tao gives you DNS, but that's a separate conversation. And it doesn't give you the TCP characteristics. And it's also weird that Tao gives you TCP. But those are network considerations that seem different in kind from server considerations. my mental model of cores is that you get to read all the bits. That is different in kind, I think, than you get to read all the bits and have a complete understanding of how they made their way to you. If we, I don't think this is the right conversation for it, but it's weird to me that a resource can opt into giving you information about the user's network conditions, period. It doesn't seem to me that CORS does any more work with regard to giving you access to the network conditions than Tau would.
I mean, I'd argue that it's not purely the network condition because it's also impacted by which server you are trying to connect to, which is where the resource is coming from, though.
Yeah, but I see that as like the characteristics of how the resource is delivered from the server to you, like how the bits are flowing to you. That seems like a thing that CORS has to give you because you see all the bits. That seems different in kind to me than how long did a DNS lookup to some other server that has literally nothing to do with the resource take.
So I agree, I agree that those are different types of information. So we have the resource level bits, the origin level bits, and the user network level bits. So I agree that DNS is a different story, and yeah, and origin level is also, you're right that CORS doesn't.
I mean, I'm honestly, like me personally, I am less concerned about the origin level characteristics than I am about the network level characteristics, simply because it's not clear to me that the current setup actually gives anything like a reasonable opt-in for the network level characteristics. The server level characteristics, I can be comfortable saying that by exposing a resource via CORS, you give information about the way that a connection was made to the server. Like I can kind of justify that to myself. The DNS and TCP, well, the DNS level data seems quite different in kind to me. And it doesn't appear to me that CORS would normally let you see that data, nor does it seem to me that it should, since it's a completely different server whose characteristics you're revealing. Yeah. I think that's also true of Next Hop Protocol, insofar as that is somebody else's data that I am saying that you have access to, but I have no control over that, and it's not mine to reveal.
Yeah. Okay, so
one other question I had. So if we're thinking about this, about those opt-ins being complicated, if Tau only gives you timings and it's called timing allow origin, and this is the thing you opt in to have timings, and if you don't have it, you don't have the timings, that seems to me like a simple enough mental model to have, which is if I want the timings, I have this thing, and if I don't have this thing, I don't have the timings, versus having some implication for parts of Tau if you have CORS, which looks a lot more complicated.
So the motivation, at least from my perspective here, is that after I don't know how many years, we still have low adoption of Tau, even for resources that are static and public and no one really cares about their timing. And introducing CORS to the equation for the bits of information that are already exposed through CORS would significantly increase the visibility we have in web performance for what third parties are doing. And at least the way I was imagining it, without compromising any of the security bits.
So I would agree with that assertion for the things that the server actually has control over. I have a harder time justifying that conclusion for things that the server is just an endpoint after going through.
Yeah, so going back to the splitting of the time, so from your perspective, it would be fine for the resource level timings, but not for the origin level, and definitely not for the user network level.
So the resource level, certainly. Origin level, I think we can talk about. And user level, I don't see the justification for that.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Okay, so moving to sizes. Right now, sizes are exposed with timing allow origin. And what I'm proposing is that we would stop. And that would hopefully enable browsers that haven't implemented the sizing related bits of resource timing to potentially implement them. We would move away from a TAO-based opt-in to a, I don't know if corp-based opt-in is the right term, or a cross-origin isolated context. So I don't know if a corp opt-in on its own would give you the size for any random attacker, and that point maybe
So
you can.
in my mind, the reason that corp is used for cross-origin isolation and not cores is that we wanted to create a distinction between granting access to read all the bits and know the content of a thing from the ability of using that thing as part of your website. So we wanted to create a mechanism by which you could embed something opaquely, have the ability to transclude it in your page, but not have the ability to understand what it is. So both sizes and metadata concern me a bit with regard to the kinds of attacks that we see in the XS leaks repository. I assume that y'all are familiar with those. Those kinds of side channels use things like size and use things, which is inferred in those cases from timing, and use things like metadata, and in particular, the distinctions between a failed request and a successful request. So things like side effects from a 500 or a 404 error, which would be directly exposed via the metadata, as a mechanism of determining whether a particular resource was for a logged in user or non-logged in user, or whether they had access to a particular thing, or a variety of other things that you could learn by examining what a particular user has access to. So I'm a little bit worried about blurring the line between including a resource and reading the resource. I'm not convinced that that's a line that we can actually hold. So I'm totally willing to debate this a bit. But if that is a line that we can hold, then it seems pretty clear to me that corp can't give you size and that corp can't give you metadata. That in fact, all corp can do is give you access to pull in a resource. And you're right to say that for size in particular, we might already be over that line with the memory measurement work that I saw Ulan on the call earlier, so I assume he's around somewhere, is working through in Chromium. So this might already be a line that is untenable, but I guess I'm curious as to what your thoughts are about that framing and whether it's one that makes any sense.
So the reason why I thought it's okay is exactly because of memory measurement, and because that is already something that is exposing those sizes. Another, so the JS profiling is another bit that goes beyond just the embeddability of the resource and enables profiling of JavaScript resources, which seemed also something that goes beyond just, it doesn't give you the byte characteristics of the resource, but it does provide some information about it.
It's entirely possible that I've misunderstood the scope of those APIs. My understanding was that those were only related to the amount of memory that was taken up by JavaScript and JavaScript objects. Is it also including all of the memory that's associated with things like images that are loaded onto the page and other sub-resources like fonts?
So I can answer that for measure memory. Initially, it was about JavaScript, but since after having the cross-origin isolation mechanism, we saw that we can expand that to more memory.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah.
However, it's pretty clear that none of that gives you the metadata, for example.
So can I chime in? Because I actually think the answer to what Mike mentioned, like there are two parts of the answer, right? One is the explicit APIs like performance measure memory. And the second part of the answer is the fact that by setting corp, you are agreeing to having the resource being loaded into the address space of a cross-origin renderer, which allows, we can probably argue about whether that is the web threat model or not, but in practice, it allows you to put the resource in cross-origin renderer's address space, which means that the renderer can read the specific bytes, can read the size of the resource, the specific bytes of that resource, and the metadata included in that resource. So if you are a website, right, a web application that opts into your resource being loaded in a way that allows this, I think it's kind of difficult to make an argument that even though you have allowed this, it is unsafe to reveal the same information in a slightly different way.
So I think that the way that I was thinking about this a year ago was make the attacker do the attack. That is, it is the case that by allowing your resource to be included into someone else's address space, there is risk that a malicious entity could try to gain more information than should be available based on the API surface that we expose. CORS grants that access. That is, it's an explicit mechanism to give the other party access to all of that information. It seemed to me at the time, and I think it still seems to me, that there is a meaningful difference in intent between a server that wants to allow its resources to be included and a server that wants to allow its resources to be read. And it's the browser's job to ensure that the things that aren't supposed to be readable are in fact not readable. Now, we know that's not the case today. That is, we know that Spectre attacks and other kinds of side channels do reveal this information. It's not clear to me, however, that we have to accept that as part of the contract that we bake into the web APIs.
But in that case, why do we say that it's okay to be cross-origin isolated when you have and do not require that all sub-resources, cross-origin sub-resources in cross-origin isolated contexts go through CORS instead of corp?
I think that is the conclusion that you would reach if Archer's argument was correct. My assertion is that Archer's argument is not correct, and therefore you don't reach that conclusion.
Oh, I'm saying that from an implementation perspective, I have no way of making a guarantee that the corp resources will not be attacked in a cross-origin isolated context.
Yes, I agree with you. Again, I would say that there is value to making the attacker perform the attack rather than just giving them the information.
Sure. I mean, after we can argue about how easy the attack is, in particular for size, if you can just read the memory measurement API, that seems a very obvious attack. That's very quick to do. And I'm not sure there's that much value of hiding it compared to having them perform it.
Yeah, I guess I am a bit surprised that the memory measurement API reveals information beyond the state of the JavaScript heap. And I need to think about that.
I have to say though, yesterday that was exactly the point I raised, which is that I have a serious concern about that aspect of memory measurement API, and we have already said that we're not going to implement the JS profiling API. So both of those points people are making so far as to why those information is exposed is completely invalid in our view.
Yeah. So the problem where I have so. In my view, it's unclear to me what we would tell web developers that they need to do in terms of which resources they can set corp to, beyond just set it for public resources that reveal nothing, nothing confidential and not impacted by credentials or network location or whatnot. And anything beyond that seems very tricky and subtle and something that people will get wrong. That's, but maybe, Mike, I saw things you wrote about some sort of an opt-in for a resource to say
Yeah, that was the next slide in your presentation.
Yeah.
I do wonder, I'm not convinced of this yet, but I'll throw it out there and y'all can tell me that it's crazy. It might be the case that it would be valuable for servers to have some sort of explicit signal that a resource is not in any way influenced by the user that is requesting it, that it is not a personalized resource, that instead it is a resource that is static, never changes, doesn't care about your IP address, doesn't care about whether it gets cookies or not, is just going to drop all that on the floor and blitz some bits back to you. It seems like we would be able to do some different things if we had an assertion from the server that a particular resource was not a resource that would ever change based upon the user who is requesting it. I think there's a lot of room for for discussion about what those things might be. But it seems to me that creating a mechanism for the server to make this kind of assertion, and also a mechanism for the browser, or for the site rather, to make an assertion that it expects the resources that it requests to have this kind of characteristic, might give us some freedom. I see Ian just popped up, and I know that he's thought about this in the past with regard to a credentialless request mode. I don't know where that document actually lives, but maybe there's something that you could point to, Ian?
Yeah, I can certainly go and take a look for it. It's probably been buried in my drive behind a bunch of other proposals, but yeah, we've certainly brought up the idea of having a completely credentialless request page to be able to expose all these things.
So I mean, I think that's I think that's a good idea, apart from whether it gives us any more ability with regard to the timing proposals and opt-ins that we're talking about here. But B, I'm wondering whether there is a specific category of resource that the folks in this group are really interested in getting data about, and whether that category includes mostly this kind of content, where I'm trying to load something from a server, where the thing that I'm trying to load isn't at all related to the user. It's just like a resource that I need for my page to load, and it's going to be the same resource for everyone. I wonder whether there are things that we could do with caching. I wonder whether there are things that we could do at various levels of the stack if we had an assertion that this particular resource is never personalized. And that might give us some freedom with regard to sizes and with regard to metadata, because if it's not a personalized resource, then obviously the size is going to be the same for everyone. Now, Of course, you need to think about how servers would try to abuse this and whether there's some messaging potential that this would expose. But it seems to me that the idea is worth exploring and might create a subset of resources for which we can have a different set of rules than resources in the main.
Yeah, so I'll let the analytics folks maybe answer your question. It's just, I want to, small comment, just, it's unclear to me what the delta from a developer perspective, what would be the delta between this and Corp? And
Corp uses cookies.
So,
go ahead, Arthur, I'm sorry.
no, please. I think you may answer my question as well if you keep talking, Mike.
Or could we have like this as an extension of Corp? You could have like a special Corp credential-less mode where you say I didn't care about cookies when you reply.
I think that I wrote something and it was originally, I think, an extension of Corp, and then it was something else, and then it was an X totally not personalized header or something. But it doesn't really matter how you spell it. The core. So my claim is that if you accept that there is a distinction between Corp and cores, then there are a set of resources that can be included in your page, and there is a set of resources that can be included in your page and read. I think that latter group can be split into things that are user specific, but that should be read cross-origin, that are intended to be read cross-origin. And those user-specific things have to opt in on an origin-by-origin basis. That is, if you get cookies along with a CORS request, you have to send an ACAO header back. And there's another kind of resource that is readable across origin, but is not user-specific. And we currently have that in CORS with ACAO star. But we get lots of feedback from lots of people that that's really hard to use because you have to know that you have to request it in anonymous mode and like retries and all this stuff. And that if we reset expectations instead of around CORS as being like, this is a totally public resource and is requestable in a public way. And I don't care if I get cookies, you can send cookies, you can not send cookies, doesn't matter, I'm public. That is a different category of resource, different in kind from things that use CORS, and also different in kind from things that use Corp, assuming that you accept this distinction between readable and not readable.
So in my slide here, I think you can replace Corp with that magical mode if we had that. Like if we had that magical mode today, this is what I would put there. It's just that, yeah, it's unclear to me like what the difference is, but maybe we could let the analytics folks provide more details on the type of resources they're interested in getting more information on. So I don't know, maybe, yeah, I don't know, someone with opinions?
I always have opinions, but I'm happy for other people to have opinions as well. Any other people want to share? And if not, I will just talk about some of our needs for RUM analytics. So things like sizes is important to us from just a kind of like a page weight point of view. So today we're reporting resource sizes for all of the content on our customers' pages. It's not complete because of cross-origin resources and or cross-frame resources. And so when we are asserting that a page is of a certain size or weight or total byte content, we know that it is not complete because of all these things. And so if our customers were able to really truly track something closer to the actual page weight, especially with third-party resources, they would have a better sense of what the actual cost of those are, of including those widgets and ads and all these kinds of things, versus really only getting it for their first party or TAO enabled content today. So that's one particular thing. You know, from a CDN point of view, we can also use some of this data to help improve our network, make sure things are going smoothly from both the sizes and caching point of information that we could get. But yeah, a lot of it just basically comes down to page weight and being able to more accurately actually know what's going on the page and its cost. And certainly things like the other metadata, like I know we haven't really talked about status codes and content type, but all of that can help us spot problems, spot inefficiencies, help make our customer sites faster for their visitors, etc.
I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm on mute. From a resource type perspective, do you have any visibility into whether most of those third parties that you want to track, are they credentialed? Are they user specific? Is it something that the third party origins can safely say, this is public, don't worry about it?
I don't recall that offhand. I do remember doing a crawl of resources that had not set timing allow origin, but had set CORS or ACAO star, I believe. And it was a significant increase in the number of resources over TAO only resources. But
yeah,
I
believe it was around like 25% tile and then 25 more with cores.
Right. Yep. Something around there.
Something around those orders of magnitude.
Yep. But I don't have necessarily a breakdown of what those types of resources may be otherwise uncredentialed.
I mean, it seems to me that it's a hard thing to know from the outside. Like it's going to be fairly application specific as to whether a particular resource does anything interesting with user data.
Yeah. So I think that from a developer perspective, the difficulty about cores is A, pre-flights, and B, the fact that you can't really opt in all your resources to cores. And even if you, for the cases where you can, you have to explicitly say on each one of them, this is cross-origin. Like you have to add the cross-origin attribute, which is not intuitive and no one really gets it. So it's, I see the appeal in in that kind of that resource is not at all credentialed, nor not user specific kind of header. From
as
that perspective, even if it overlaps with cores.
Yeah, maybe as some context. The place I would like us to get is a place in which the defaults are different than they are today. That is, I think it would be good for us to move to a credentialless request mode by default and to opt in specific requests to contain credentials. And that opt-in might be cores. It might be spelled in the way that I was just talking about as like public or personalized resource or something along those lines. I don't have strong opinions about that. But I think that changing that default would give us different characteristics on the web than we see today and would make some kinds of requests easier to reason about if we do our best not to include identifying information about the user. Obviously, people that are using IP addresses to do ACLs are still going to be a problem. People that have intranets are still going to be a problem. So I wouldn't claim that it resolves all issues, but I do think it simplifies the model that we have mentally if it is rare that resources are able to use credentials for a user in order to change their characteristics. And like that comes in two steps. The first step is to introduce a new cross-origin embedder policy. Right now we have require corp. We should add something to that that's like, don't send my credentials. Spell it however you like. And we would need to introduce, we could then introduce something on the server side that would be like the other side of that assertion that like, this is totally not a resource that's using IP or anything along those lines. And it seems to me like that would give us some flexibility, but I'll fully admit that I have not spelled any of that out to basically anyone's satisfaction.
So, I guess I am still kind of hung up on the distinction between, Mike, the mode that you are talking about that let's say would replace corp in the second bullet point, right? Let's say the credentialless mode. Because in my mind, this is exactly what corp cross-origin was meant to do. The only difference that I see is a semantic one where corp cross-origin says, I allow a cross-origin page to load my resource and potentially leak its contents if it's cross-origin isolated, as opposed to what you are talking about, which is, let's say, attaching a label to the resource saying it is unauthenticated. But I don't see why corp cross-origin is not a superset of what you're talking about that we would be comfortable treating as such, right? So to me, corp cross-origin encompasses already what you've been talking about.
That might well be the case. I'm totally willing to be convinced that this distinction is completely illusory or that it is in fact a superset. It's certainly not the way that I was thinking about corp versus cores when we originally designed cross-origin embedder policy. That said, I'm very willing to be convinced that this distinction is not one that makes any difference, and that it's not worth trying to introduce complexity around these concepts. It seems to me that in the status quo, there are resources that do want to change their content based on the user, but that do not intend for that content to be accessible to the context in which they're embedded. That might not be possible. And we might just have to say that because it's not possible, because computers are broken, that we have to align the API surface of the web to that reality. That might well be reasonable. I don't think I'm quite yet willing to give that up. It seems to me that there is a line there that we can hold. It might be such a thin line that it's not worth trying to draw. I'm not yet convinced of that.
What concerns me about drawing that line is that people will trip over that line and fall and break their face. In my view, it's better to have a clear line that splits, personalized from non-personalized than various shades of personalization on the way. But
yeah, the part of the line that I think might be worth holding is whether the personalized data has to be legible by the context that's loading it. Artur probably has more context here than I do because he's actually looked at some of the resources that Google would set corp on. If it's the case that for all of those resources, we would also be comfortable using cores and exposing them cross-origin, that is without any particular restriction on the origin that is actually able to read the data, then that's a strong argument in favor of that distinction not being one with a difference.
So I think it is, but I think it's conflated by the fact that how I have been thinking about the role of corp probably influences where we roll it out, right? But I do think that currently, if we were to set corp cross-origin on a resource that has authenticated information, we would treat this as a vulnerability, right? Because part of the cross-origin isolated, cross-origin opener policy, embedded policy model is that this resource may end up in an address space of someone we
So
don't trust.
one point that might make this more complicated is that in Chrome, we have the ability to load iframes out of process, whereas that ability I don't think is yet present in other browsers. We do require you to set corp on iframe responses if cross-origin embedder policy is set. It's not clear to me that every resource that wants to be framed in a page also wants to be read by its embedder.
So I just say that it's true in Chrome for certain platforms, because if you're on Android, for example, it's not clear that your iframe will be in a different process or will ever
like
be.
I'm juggling a lot here. But let's assert that browsers have not yet all gotten to a point where out-of-process iframes are consistently a thing. In that world, I think there are HTML documents that would not want to be legible to their embedder and yet want to be embedded. And if I feel like that has to be a line that we hold. If it's not, then we need to change some iframes and they shouldn't be framed.
In that case, I think the issue is more our implementation of cross-origin isolated, and what we agreed will work with cross-origin isolated than anything else.
I mean, I agree it's an implementation problem, but it's one that's going to be with us for a while. Period.
Well, no, more like if you want to be embedded in a context where you won't be legible, then you do not set co-op on yourself. And then normally you're not embedded in a cross-origin isolated context, but you're still embedded cross-origin. And I think that answers your question, Mike.
I'm not sure it does, but I also think we're over time and I need to go give my kids some dinner. So what is the right place to continue this conversation?
That is a good question. I think we can kick off an issue on resource timing, maybe summarize this discussion, and I'll do my best to do that. And yeah, and then we can continue that conversation there. Yeah.
So, by the way, I wanted to echo the point Mike just made, which is that I think we have to hold the line that like there are resources that it wants to be embedded to embed it, but wouldn't be willing to have its content read. In fact, we have devised some plans to do that in a case where the process isolation is in place. We have actually thought about many resource types. I think the hardest one is the scripts, but just because it gets executed in there. But there are, like, for example, things like images, there's no reason why its content and metadata needs to be, other than the, let's say, size, needs to be readable by the content that loaded with a course, right? So a corp rather. So I think there's a lot of things that, like, a lot of assumptions being made here that are not necessarily agreed upon by all the browser vendors either. So it seems like we do need a more broader question, like discussion about what these headers really mean and what really we're trying to achieve with each one.
Okay, cool. Okay, so with that, yeah, we will continue that conversation over GitHub. Arthur, you had your hand raised. I don't know if it's... Yeah.
I already talked about it. Thank you, though.
Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot, folks. I'm going to run off.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I think we can move on to reporting API updates. Let me unshare my screen so that Ian can share his.
And I'll try to share mine. Let's see. And I lost the meeting code. There we go. Is that up yet? Oh, perfect. Okay, so let's see. In the agenda, this was called reporting API updates, and you can see the slide is reporting or network reporting APIs. So a bit of a spoiler. That's probably the biggest change that we can talk about. But first, I guess a couple of implementation and usage updates. So I believe that currently Chrome is the only one implementing this. I'd love to hear if I'm wrong about that. We have support for, of course, CSP reports, network error logging. We have deprecation, intervention, and crash reports. We have just started, or maybe just on the tail end of an origin trial for reporting co-op and co-op violations. And we have support behind a flag that hasn't actually shipped yet for reporting violations of permission and document policies. In the real world, Chrome sees the JavaScript Reporting Observer API used on about 4% of all page views. And I couldn't find any sort of metrics inside Chrome about the actual report to header, so I did a quick scan of HTTP archive data, and it looks like about 0.5% of the top 5 million or so home pages actually set a report to header and are using the reporting API that way. So updates since this time last year. So yeah, the biggest thing is that the reporting API itself has been split into 2 specs. We've got the reporting API and then what we're calling the network reporting API. They have different scopes, they deal with different kinds of data, and have different implications in terms of privacy and things like that. Also, just because we like making more repositories, we've split off the crash, deprecation, and intervention reports each into their own repository in incubation. Previously, these were all part of the reporting API, which led to some concern about whether or not they were actually going to be required. So those are all in incubation and should be the source of lots of discussion. There's interesting things to talk about there. So the reporting API itself has been stripped down. It serves a couple of purposes. First off, it defines the overall structure of what a report is, what it looks like, what kind of data it includes, what the wire protocol is for actually sending reports out to the collectors. That spec defines the concept of what a reporting endpoint is, and whereabouts in the document or worker that's actually held. And then it defines what we're calling document-centered reporting. So document-centered reporting is reports which are tied to the lifetime of a single document and are not mixed with reports from other documents. The reporting API defines how to configure that and how to use the JavaScript Reporting Observer API to actually observe those things in real time on your page. So document-centered actually includes workers as well. We've just recently merged the PR to add support for workers. I think previously they were being reported through their creator document if you had a dedicated worker, and I don't think we supported reporting at all in shared workers or service workers. The header is also different. Previously, the report to header was defined as a JSON, I guess it's a JFE format, defining all of the various endpoints. So we've replaced that with a reporting endpoints header, which is a structured header. And it's basically just a dictionary mapping names of endpoints to the actual URLs of those endpoints. A couple other things that we've done. So we have updated the report format so that credentials are no longer sent if your collector is cross-origin. There was a fair bit of discussion about that at TPAC last year and was sort of ongoing for a while. Eventually decided that same origin credentials are probably okay and can be quite useful at times. And cross-origin credentials we should get rid of. So that's what we've done. Yeah, there was also an update about relative URL handling. And like I said, the most important thing about document reporting is that the lifetime of the reports is scoped to match the document lifetime itself. Now, contrast this with the network reporting API. So all of the bits of the reporting API that existed to support things like network error logging specifically have been removed and placed in this spec. So this extends reporting. And the purpose of it is to handle these cases like network error logging, where the reporting is necessarily out of band. It can't be tied to a specific document, either can't or shouldn't. And needs to be sent, needs to be queued up and sent outside of the scope of any particular document. We also, in that, extend the concept of endpoints to endpoint groups. Network error logging specifically because it's reporting on network conditions and your preferred endpoint may not be available. We have the concept of a group where you can add multiple endpoints and give them priorities and weights. These aren't necessary for document reporting, but they are critical for network reporting. We've also changed the configuration of network reporting. Previously, the report to header acted something like a cookie, so that any server that, any response from the server that included a report to header would overwrite the previous one's configuration. And the last report to header that you'd seen would actually affect things like network error logging in terms of where those reports would go. So you could have cases where a misconfigured server, one response might overwrite the configuration of another response. You couldn't necessarily set up different reporting endpoints per document. And generally conflating these things. So what we've done is we've said, okay, network reporting is an origin level concern, essentially. It was always defined as such. And so we want to use a mechanism like origin policy. Currently, that's what's spec'd. Origin policy hasn't shipped, but that's a side issue. And similar to document reporting, the network reporting API doesn't actually define any report types. Those are left to other specs that'll build on it. And then, yeah, so we still have some issues. These aren't quite polished yet. The document reporting needs to integrate with HTML. That PR is open but hasn't landed, and it probably needs some more updates before we can do that. There's questions about which task queue we want to use. There are spec level questions about report types being defined as IDL, which the web platform test people don't like very much because it makes us generate lots of tests for objects that we don't really need. So I need to ask the question publicly about whether there's a better way to define those. And then we have some bigger open issues about privacy, some of which I think can be resolved in terms of text updates in the spec around capability URLs and things like that, where the data which should be safe to go out in the report might actually include information about the user, and we need to at least advise sites to not use reporting in those cases or be very, very careful about how they do it, or set up your own collector as a first-party collector and not send these things cross-origin. And then there's still a large open issue about user control over reporting. Whether or not the reporting mechanism entirely should be a user opt-in thing, whether users should have control over what types of reports are sent out, or whether, I think in the extreme, every report should bring up a dialogue saying, would you like to report this to the site? And I don't think we've achieved any sort of resolution on that. So that's definitely a thing to still discuss. And I think that's the end of my slides. So that should leave us at least 10 minutes to talk about some of these things.
Cool. Thank you. So just as a reminder, since the 10 years ago that happened since Fukuoka, the reasoning for splitting up the previous reporting API into two separate infrastructure is that I believe Mozilla was interested in implementing one but not the other, the document scoped one. Is that, do I remember correctly?
I can't speak for Mozilla, and I don't know if there's anyone representing them on the call, but that roughly matches my recollection, that they were interested in reporting for co-op and co-app, but the spec, as it was written and implemented, had some issues that we wanted to resolve first, specifically around bundling of reports, from different documents together. And we wanted to tie it more tightly to the document, essentially.
Cool, thanks. On the origin policy front that you mentioned, is there any movement on that front? Because I know last time I looked, there were a bunch of open issues there with regard to, for example, the performance implications of origin policy related things, making it in time to impact the document. But from a network reporting perspective, maybe that is not as awful as for other use cases.
It's probably not as bad. I think the two biggest issues, as I recall, with origin policy are, one, the first load problem, where your policy might need to be set before your first document is received, but the policy won't be. And there was a concern that the origin policy itself is a potential cookie mechanism. And I don't know that that's been resolved yet. So I believe that that's what's delayed finalizing and shipping that in Chrome. Really what we need for network reporting is just some sort of origin level configuration. Origin policy seemed like the best candidate for that. It may not be the only one. But we need some sort of out-of-band, not tied to any particular document, way to configure reporting for the entire origin.
Makes sense.
I mean, we could probably tie it to, DNS, SRV records or something, but that wasn't the way the development's been going.
Yeah, that would introduce a bunch of operational complexity.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions from the crowd?
If there's not, I would be interested in knowing what other implementers are currently thinking about this, if there are any plans to implement one or the other.
So I guess Benjamin is not here, so I'll comment from Mozilla, but I'm not too sure actually, so I need to check the folks here.
Thanks. And Ryasuke or Alex, care to comment about reporting policy or network reporting or both?
I don't have any strong feelings about it, but I can't say I followed it closely enough to have noticed any details I may disagree with. So, unfortunately, that's not a very useful comment.
Okay. For the privacy issues themselves, is this something that this group should take to the privacy CG and try to focus the discussion there? I'm not sure what the normal way of dealing with these things in WebPerf is.
Normally, we just tackle issues until we think that they're, they have a good privacy story. We can definitely try to involve more privacy-oriented folks in those discussions and make sure that we take everything into account. So not necessarily take it to the privacy CG, but maybe bring in folks from the privacy CG to review the bits and pieces that we think need review. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense.
The privacy review is mandatory, by the way, when we reach wide review, but we can ask them before. It's the privacy IG, not CG.
Yeah, so the wide review privacy phase is, I think, somewhat later, but maybe we could kick off that particular part, and that's ping, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so not the CG, but the interest group.
Indeed. And it's before entering candidate recommendation when we do wide review, but we can, since we have to write the security and privacy considerations beforehand, then if we have difficulty writing those privacy considerations, it's good to meet with them, and they might have ideas that we may not have. They could add suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah, so the capability URLs point seem more Boolean than the user control one. Like it seems like we don't want reports to be able to maintain state beyond what cookies can today, and as such, we can, the answer is either they do or they don't, and if they do, we should fix it. Where for the user control questions seem more a more opinionated one rather than and there are various right answers there depending on your opinion and the user's opinion, I guess.
Right.
So
it's honestly something that I would prefer to leave up to the implementers. And I think that there's space for browsers to have different opinions about these things. I know that there are some people in the privacy CG who don't share that opinion and believe that these things should be spelled out and there should be one way to do it.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said.
As far as capability URLs go, I think that the thing to do is to figure out the wording very carefully, because there's nothing the browser can do to prevent capability URLs from leaking. It has to be on the site owner to not include those in reports and understand where in their site those are and ensure that they don't get out cross origin.
Yeah.
Right. So it's moving, but there's little we can do except advise as strongly and as clearly as we can.
Yeah. Or yeah, and the risk there, so is the risk there tracking through reports, or is the risk something
The risk is
exposing the actual URLs in logs or whatnot?
right, exposing the actual URLs in reports that get sent to third parties. And if that report contains, like a login session identifier or something, there are URLs that can be used with no cookies to change your password, for instance. There's URLs that can be used to sign you in or sign you out. And having those get leaked to a third party is probably not what the user wants.
Yeah. Yeah. One way to tackle it is to truncate URLs that go beyond, like expose only a part of the actual URL if it has certain patterns that seem capability-ish, and providing a hash of the URL instead to make sure that those third parties can correlate the report to a URL but not abuse it.
Interesting. So providing both a limited URL and the hash? The concern would be that the first party can't necessarily trace back a report to the page that generated it, if that's important.
Yeah, so they could, but they will have to keep like the hash to URL mapping that enables them to do that. So I don't know if it makes sense, but
okay, it's worth proposing.
I would like to interject that the game of guessing which parts of URLs is sensitive is a losing game, and I think we should definitely stay on the side of any portion of a URL is sensitive and can be used to steal information.
That's probably true in the generic case. I mean, maybe it would be possible to allow the site operator to declare what sort of things to redact out of a URL. Or provide some sort of alternate URL that they could report instead of the actual page URL. I'll raise an issue on whether or not there's anything technical we can do.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, otherwise, I think we're on our time for a break. So, unless, yeah, we can wrap that up and then get back in 15 minutes to talk about how reporting API can be relied on to maybe report performance metrics. Okay. Cool. So yeah, see you all in 15.